we got Sam, who's calling in from California. Sam, you're live on Talk Heathen. What's going on?
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Sam. How can we help
How
you?
are you guys? Well, I just have a quick question for you guys. So I've been going back and forth between theism and atheism for like forever, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that I'm more comfortable being a theist than an atheist. But I'm also a physics major, so that is a conflict of interest usually. But I was wondering, like, what is your take on miracles? Like, how would you justify that in your worldview?
How do I justify miracles? Well, I mean, I guess I don't justify
like,
miracles.
how do you explain miracles? Because there's no scientific explanation for some of the miracles.
Well, Sam, what's to you an example of a bona fide miracle?
Good question.
I mean, personally, I've only heard there was one pastor who was stung by a scorpion and then was pronounced dead, and then he received a word, and now he's living and preaching and like going from dead to alive. I don't think you can explain scientifically. I mean,
okay, well,
not that I know of anyway.
Let's talk about this. So this is a story that you heard about a pastor who got stung by a scorpion and supposedly heard the word and is now doing fine. Is this I'm not, I promise you, I'm not trying to belittle you in any sense. I really am not. I want to know, do you think this is the best example of a miracle that you can think of?
I mean, personally, like the one that I know, like I can verify since I've met the pastor, I've spoken to him. Yes, this is the best example ever. I'm not sure. I mean, there are people who grow legs and limbs and all that stuff. So,
okay. So here's my issue with that, Sam. One, I can't verify what you just said in any sense, right? And I know like we're limited to the medium of doing a call-in show, so you're trying to keep your answers quick, and I'm asking questions, and I totally understand that. Maybe in a longer conversation, we can actually investigate that. But that seems to boil down like the problems of what a lot of miracle claims are, which are just stories of things that have happened, right? So like even every lawyer will tell you this, I think, like eyewitness testimony is not the most reliable thing that happens, especially when we're talking about exactly what happens in medical terms, right? Like what is going on with people's bodies. The recounting of these kinds of events from non-medical professionals, I think, is often really suspect. And a lot of miracle stories in the modern world really boil down to like cancer treatment stuff, like, oh, I had cancer and then I don't. Sometimes it's other kind of unknown ailments that people heal from. And that's what I hear about. So if those are the stories that I think you should be the most suspect about, because we have documentation for these things, right? Like we look into a lot of medical phenomena. If something is ailing somebody and somebody was able to heal from it, doctors are going to want to know about that so that they can effectively treat patients that way, right? And even if it's like the idea of religious belief on individuals has also been studied, like if that's a positive or negative effect, and there's interesting results of that. But the point is, like, people will look into that stuff, and anecdotal accounts really just aren't going to be enough to push the needle. And I think you, Sam, as someone who looks into physics, who should also be skeptical, because I know you've encountered a lot of weird claims from people who talk about physics. Okay, it's a lot out there. You should also be suspect of that, right? Like you can't just believe every single weird physics claim that happens, because you are more knowledgeable of the tools than most people, and so you have an understanding of how the world literally works and should be able to explain that in terms that make sense, right? So for me, I have to be more convinced. It can't be more than just a story, right? But Cynthia, what's your take?
You know, on the flagship show of the Atheist Experience, of the Atheist Community of Austin, the nonprofits, we actually have examined a few different news stories about this very thing, about people claiming to have died and came back to life, and or they would make a claim to say, I think of this one particular pastor in I want to say in South Africa, that made his parishioners bury him because he said that he was going to come back in 3 days, just like Jesus. And they did what he told him to do, and then they put him in the ground. And then 3 days later, they came back and he was dead, and he was not back at all. It's a lot of times when people make these particular claims about, they died and came back, like Dan was saying, a lot of times we can attribute medical intervention that has happened. I can, if I would even to speculate specifically about this particular pastor who was bitten by a scorpion and then was brought back or what have you, who's to say that he was poisoned to the point where he just lost unconsciousness, and then the doctors were able to purge the poison from his body to the point that he regained consciousness again. He could have possibly considered that a death, but
there's thousands of scorpions too that vary in level of lethality, right?
Exactly. So so it could be like a lot of just different inferences why this particular person was able to regain consciousness after they're being bitten. It does merit more study to actually say exactly what happened. If you could actually talk to the doctors that actually treated this person, if you can see the medical records that said what attributed to his healing per se. But just like I'm with Dan, like just like based on an anecdote alone, that's not enough to convince me that that's actually a miracle. Especially like when we can see, especially since we have like a lot of information, studies, things of that nature that have tested a lot of these particular claims, and they happen to be not what they it happened not to be considered a miracle, something supernatural, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, so I might need to clarify a little bit. I was trying to keep it short and just get your take on miracles in general. But the reason I brought up the pastor story is he actually showed his medical records. And this happened in Africa. So he was bitten by an African scorpion, which is like the deadliest scorpion. And so he didn't exactly seem to claim that he was dead. It was just the doctors gave him like 2 hours to live, and instead of dying, he survived, and he attributed the words of the Bible to the reason why he survived, because there was no other medical way to save him. So this is the one that stumps me the most, is because there is no explanation. Like, there is no medical reason he's alive. So I'm like, is it possible?
Well, Sam, can I say this really quick? Sam, I'm sorry, but I have to say this too. I took care of my dad before he passed away from cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live, and he lived for over 12. Doctors' estimates about, people and how long they're going to live, or if they'll be able to treat them or things like that, are not always correct. They're people too, but just to say, or just attribute to like, we can't find out why this particular person is living, therefore God. That's a God of a gaps fallacy, and that's why I'm saying, like, even if he said like, well, these are my records, who's to say that he's actually interpreted them correctly? Was there any other medical people that was in the audience at the time that was able to read his records?
Yeah, and even beyond that level of skepticism, right? It's like people get bites from scorpions and survive. Like that's just, I think that's a natural fact, right? Like for every person that we may say, oh, well, I prayed while this happened and it healed. There's probably people out there that have been bitten by snakes and scorpions and other things that didn't pray at all and also got healed. Like I'm sure you can find those stories out there. And they often don't get picked up because there's nothing special about that, right? It's just like our immune system or our body healing. But there's also things that we know that we can't live without that I would be more impressed with. Like if your pastor got his head cut off and then he lived after that, like that's something, right? But thing is, like, people live from venomous. Yeah, I mean, like that would be a miracle to me. I think if now that's barring, of course, our advancements in like head transplants and stuff, because like that's a thing that's happening, which is interesting. But that's all being done under medical, under supervised conditions. We're not just talking about somebody getting decapitated out wherever and then getting put back on. So like I think, Sam, if I were you and that was the most convincing thing to me personally, right, I would reconsider whether that was strong enough to believe in the proposition that theism is true or that miracles occur. But that's just me.
And me.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, that's it. That's the take. That's the tweet. Hit submit. That's it.
That's it.
What do you think, Sam?
Oh, I mean, I'm torn. I'm always torn because it's like I get where you're coming from. Where it's like, is this enough to convince anyone other than the person who actually experienced it? And even the person who experienced it, it's not enough of a solid evidence to actually believe. But I don't know. There's just so much mystery in the world that I'm just like, I don't know how people could just be like, well, that just happened by chance, and they dismiss God when.
Sam, can I just tell you something?
I'm stuck in the God of the gaps.
Sam, can I just interject a little bit of, I don't want to say advice, but it's advice. I would encourage you while you are studying science and while you are learning more, and even getting information from other theists about different happenings, to remain skeptical and ask questions. And continue to do that for the rest of your life. I've been where you are. I've been on that teeter-totter before, and the only thing that kind of got me over the hump is asking a lot of questions and trying to seek out what the closest thing to truth is possible. It may take a little bit, but I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, and I'd also point out too, Sam, that while it may seem like it's unlikely things do happen all the time, right? Like
Right.
statistically, somebody wins the lottery every day, right? Like it may not be you, it may not be me, but like somebody does win it, because that's just how the lottery works, right? Somebody has to win. And that's true for a lot of other kind of edge cases, especially in the medical sciences, right? Like people do tend to survive unlikely scenarios. People, have these things happen. And because of their upbringing, because of their culture, because of how they understand the world, they may have religious attributions. But what's interesting is that look at how many Muslims will say the same thing about Allah helping them in their crisis. Look at the witches on TikTok right now that say, look, I was sick and I did a ritual, and now I'm healed because I drank this thing I left out under a full moon. Like you'll
Right.
find that these claims are quite common amongst lots of different backgrounds. And then I'm just talking about modern day examples. You can go way back and look at like stories of how Chinese medicine supposedly help people, an apothecary like help people. And we know based on our modern knowledge, this isn't actually how these things happen, or probably is very likely unlikely to be. Maybe it's placebo effect, maybe it's other things. But just because we don't have all the answers doesn't mean that theism is the most likely explanation either. That would be my second thing to you, because I think that was a fallacy that I had, at least when I was a theist, because that was my preset ideas of how the world worked. Is, well, who can explain this? Well, God has to be the best explanation, but that may not actually be true. In fact, I don't even know what the likelihood of a God explanation could be for like most things, right? It's so uncalculable. It's really hard to determine. But we're not here to lecture you, Sam. You wanted to get our take, and this is our take, right? Okay, so hopefully you can take with that as you will, and I'd be curious to see if your thoughts would change on any of this in the future. But regardless, thanks so much for calling in and asking your question, because I do appreciate your honesty and hesitancy in changing your beliefs. You sound like somebody who wants to believe in true things, who wants to understand, like, are your views correct? And here's our take on it. Here's why we don't go the theist route. Because I think there's problems with that, right?
Yep. But keep on asking questions, Sam. Keep on exploring. Keep on trying to, gain as much knowledge about the world around you as possible. And keep on calling back in and bring some more things to, to the host, and bounce off ideas. It might help you out in the future.
Yeah, we love to see it. We love to see it.